guys, it's Cece. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're playing some Raid Shadow Legends, and in honor of Halloween, we are going to take a look at some of the coolest looking champions. The champions that made it onto this list are two reasons. Number one, we are still going to look at their skills and usability, but also their looks. And we're kind of featuring this around like a spooky season, how they kind of match the Halloween vibes is what we are going for. But we're gonna plug in another champion who, although she may not match Halloween, she could definitely be a cosplay or a costume, and that would be Elenaril, who you can actually get for free if you are a new player downloading Raid Shadow Legends using my link down below or by scanning the QR code on the screen. That's right, you will actually start the game off with Elenaril. You don't have to wait to actually get her. She will be right in your inbox. And then once you reach level 25, you're also gonna get a Uugo sent to you. So be sure that you download it using my link. Our first champion on this list is from the Dark Elves faction, and she is actually an epic because we're not just gonna include legendaries in here, but looking at her, it's gonna be Madame Sarus, and obviously she's gotta be on this list. I mean, look at her. She encapsulates like a witchy vibe immediately, and she totally works. But on top of it all, she is a void epic who is really good. Starting off with her skill 1, does attack an enemy and has a 20% chance of placing the fear debuff for a turn. If they're under 1 debuff, the chance is going to increase, and then if they're under 2 debuffs or more, it's going to increase even more, up to like 45%. So that's kind of nice because if they're debuffed, it is going to increase the chance of placing it, but just the fact that she's able to place a fear debuff is something that is very useful. Her second skill is an AoE, which we love that it attacks all targets, but it has the chance of actually stealing a random buff from each target. The nice thing is that not only does she have the chance to steal it, but if any of the buffs are stolen, it's actually going to place a block debuff on all allies for 2 turns, and then it places a true fear debuff on all enemies who have the buffs stolen. So she's able to kind of buff up her own team while she debuffs them. And again, that being an AoE. Her third skill is one that is really good because it removes all buffs from enemies, and while she's removing it, she's actually going to place debuffs onto them with the decreased attack and the decreased defense for 2 turns. So first of all, she's going to go ahead, remove all their buffs while she debuffs them. Being an AoE as well is absolutely incredible. Her third skill is really nice. And then she also has the passive. So the passive is going to place the shield buff, which will be equal to 10% of her max HP at the start of each turn. So being able to have that shield on her, and while she's attacked under that shield buff, she's going to have a 35% chance of placing the fear debuff on the attacker for a turn, which, as we talked about, the fear being very useful. So overall, a great looking champion for Halloween, but also her skills being really nice, and you can actually utilize her in places like arena, so she'll be good for PvP, but she can also be useful in some dungeons. What screams Halloween more than pumpkin? So of course we have to include Harvest Jack in this list, who is an HP legendary type from the Undead Horde. I'll be honest with this one, he's mostly on the list for looks, but let's take a look at his skills as well. So starting with his skill 1, he does attack an enemy 3 times, and each hit has a chance of stealing a random buff from the target, which is kind of nice, but also has a 25% chance of placing the fear debuff for a turn if they have no active buffs. And the chance is going to increase to 100 if the buffs were stolen from the target. So if he actually successfully takes those buffs, it is going to increase that chance of placing the fear from 25 to 100. Again, that is without any skill ups, but not a terrible first skill. His skill 2 being an AoE and placing the block buff debuff for 2 turns on the targets that have the fear debuff. So if you're successfully able to place the fear, then that's going to tie into the skill 2. Also removes an increased attack buff from the target, replaces it with a 50% decreased attack debuff. So you'll see he's actually able to turn those buffs around into debuffs, and removes any continuous heal buff from the target, replacing it with a poison debuff. The number of poison debuffs is equal to the number of continuous heal buffs removed. So this skill is kind of fun because it's kind of turning the buffs into debuffs, which is one way that he's able to actually manipulate what's going on in the battlefield. His third skill is also an AoE, so it does have a chance of placing the true fear debuff for a turn. It also places a decreased speed debuff for 2 turns, and decreases their turn meter by 50% if that true fear debuff is placed. So kind of ties in where if you're able to do something, it'll do something else, but has a 75% chance of placing the sleep debuff for a turn if the true fear debuff was not placed. So depending if you were able to place it or not will affect what happens next. But again, it is nice that this one is an AoE skill. Now, he also has a passive. When attacked, it decreases the duration of all buffs on the attacker for 1 turn. So keeping in mind all these skills that we just talked about, I think he would shine most in PvP. He'd be somewhere that you can use him in like arena battles, and mainly for his manipulation of being able to turn buffs into debuffs. So with him, you would want to build him with high accuracy because you want to be able to actually successfully do all that, plus all the debuffs that he is able to place. And if you can, build him kind of speedy to be able to take advantage of that. With these champions like Madame Sarus and Harvest Jack, I'm just curious to know if you guys were playing the game when they were actually introduced into here. Comment down below and let me know if you were. Our next champion, also from the Undead Horde, is Little Miss Annie, who is a Void legendary attack type, who has different passives and skills that we need to take a look at. But looking at her as well, you see how she fits in so nicely with our Halloween theme. Let's go ahead and start with her aura skill, which increases ally attack in all battles by 33%. So that is a great way to get more attack out of your allies. Her first skill attacks an enemy 3 times, each hit having the chance of placing a heal reduction debuff and a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Anytime we're able to decrease their defense is great, but having the heal reduction even better. Her skill 2 attacks an enemy 2 times, but before attacking, it actually places an increased attack buff on the champion for 2 turns, and it's gonna ignore 25% of the target's defense. So she can do a lot of damage output with that, but also places the perfect veil buff on the champion for 2 turns, then fills the champion's turn meter by 30%. So all of that together works really well and kind of sets her up for being able to do more damage. Bringing us into the third skill, which attacks an enemy. It's going to ignore 25% of the target's defense. So again, we're seeing the ignoring defense, and it destroys the target's max HP by 25% of the damage inflicted. So you definitely want to build her to be able to do a lot of damage to really make the most of these skills. It's going to also repeat the attack if the target has both higher defense and higher max HP than this champion. Now, she is an attack type, so chances are you're going to build her with a higher attack. So if you're able to do that, she's actually going to repeat the attack, which is incredible, and places a revive on death buff on this champion for 2 turns if this attack kills an enemy. So something to factor in when you're using it. Like I said, you're going to want to build her with a high attack. So if you're able to actually kill them, it'll place that revive on death. So it is a very, very strong third skill. This will bring us into her passive. So one of them, when revived, it's going to attack the enemy that killed this champion with that default skill. But it also fills the champion's turn meter by 25% and places the shield buff on the champion equal to 50% of their max HP for 2 turns. She does have another passive where each hit has a 50% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 10% and a 100% chance of destroying the target's max HP by 10% of the damage inflicted when attacking enemies under the heal reduction and decreased defense debuffs, which we see does tie into her other skills. Also heals this champion by 10% of the damage inflicted when attacking enemies under those same debuffs. So all of that considered, she is an incredible champion. Not only looks cool for Halloween, but her skills are really good. She's got 2 of the passives, and it's really the third skill and how much damage you can actually get out of her in here that makes her shine. So she is very ideal for arena. She can do some incredible work in there, but she will also work well against different bosses and different dungeons. Just looking at her passives, the third skill, so she's fairly universal for multiple areas in the game. We're gonna stick within the Undead Horde, but of course I have to include Cece the Lost Bride. She's got to be included in here. She has an incredible skill kit. Plus, this would make a really cool cosplay for Halloween, and I think we can agree on that. Let's take a look at her skills though. So first one, she does have an aura where it is going to increase ally resistance in battles by 80%. And I think this is one of those auras that sometimes we underlook. If you are using her in places like dungeons, sometimes you need that extra resistance so you're not getting debuffed. That can be a potential to actually take advantage of an aura like this as opposed to something else like speed or attack or something else. If you find you're getting debuffed a lot, you can make use out of an aura like this. Now her first skill does attack an enemy and has an 80% chance of placing the sleep debuff for 1 turn if the target's turn meter is equal or above 50%. The debuff cannot be resisted. It also heals all allies by 5% of their max HP if the target's turn meter is below 50%. So a very nice skill because depending on their turn meter, if it is above or below, she will do something different. But regardless, it is a great skill. It's nice to have either a bit of a heal in there, or it's also nice to actually place the sleep debuff on them. So both of those being really great. Her skill 2 places the block debuff on all allies for 2 turns, which is nice. It's a very, very supportive skill, but also fills their turn meter by 10% and places the 60% increased defense buff with a 30% increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns. So huge skill. She's going to block the debuffs, increase defense, increase the speed. just really making it an awesome supportive skill. It's also worth noting that she has an incredible third skill because it does actually revive an ally with 55% HP, but a full turn meter, and then places an increased attack and an increased crit rate buff on that ally for 2 turns. So it's really the fact that she's got a revive and then it'll have a full turn meter in there. So you're able to manipulate that really well depending on who you're actually reviving. But all around with all of her skills, they work really nicely together for her being a support. But I also have to mention her passive, which heals each ally by 10% of their max HP at the start of their turn. So she's going to continuously be able to provide a heal for the team as she's moving with her target. So again, one reason you do want to build her quick on speed so you're able to utilize this passive. But she also has a 40% chance of removing something like freeze and the fear debuff from each ally at the start of their turn. So overall, you can use her everywhere in the game. She's a beast in arena, like probably one of the best places she shines, but you can utilize her essentially anywhere in the game. Any of the dungeons, in clan boss, any of those things, she's going to be a really great champion. She also has part of that passive where it works well with another champ, which would set her up even better in arena. So she'll actually remove all the debuffs from Ratos the Lost Groom at the start of their turn if they're on the same team. Now, he is the next one on my list, so we will take a look at him and see how that shines well with the skills. But I mean, obviously, just looking at her skills, we see why she's such a good support. And like I said, you can use her virtually anywhere. As I had mentioned, the last one on this list is going to be Ratos the Lost Groom, who is also from the Undead Horde and totally, definitely matches our Halloween theme. He is an attack legendary type. And looking at his skills, first skill does attack an enemy where he is going to have a chance of placing a decreased defense debuff for 2 turns, but also has a chance of actually granting an extra turn. So that's really nice. Anytime you can decrease defense, we can get more damage output. His second skill is going to attack an enemy and destroy part of their max HP, but that HP is actually added to his own HP, which is really cool. Kind of keeping in mind, he cannot destroy a single target's max HP by more than 60% in a battle. Makes sense, they're gonna have to limit it. So they do have a little bit of limitations in here when it comes to if it's a champion's max HP or the HP of a boss. Regardless though, the fact that he can destroy some of their HP and add it to his own is a great second skill. This brings us into his third skill, which attacks an enemy and is able to ignore 60% of their defense. So this is where you kind of see some of the damage output. He's also going to ignore unkillable and block damage buffs, which is great. And that's somewhere that you're going to kind of see him shine in arena. Enemies killed by this skill cannot be revived if the champion has gained maximum amount of HP from the Vitality Plunder skill. It grants an extra turn if this skill kills an enemy. So this is where, like I said, we're going to see this in arena and where that can kind of really come in handy. He also has a passive skill, and this is kind of something to keep in mind. So it is going to decrease damage from enemy hits so that the incoming damage from any single hit is not going to exceed 50% of this champion's max HP. Grants an extra turn if this damage reduction occurs. It won't work against bosses, but it'll work in arena, which again, I think is like the main place that he does shine. Decreases the damage taken from bosses by 15%. So this is where you can use him in other places of the game. So you can make use of him in something like Clan Boss or in Ice Golem, for example, so he will still work in dungeons. Decreases the damage taken from bosses by 30% if Cece the Lost Bride is on the same team. So if you're able to pair them together, you'll see that there is a little bit of benefit of that with his passive skill. I would say that his skills working together are kind of interesting, but he is one that you definitely want to build with a high crit rate, high crit damage, and keeping that HP up if you are able to. But him being that attack type, if you're able to pair him with Cece the Lost Bride, you may be able to get a lot of damage output from him just looking at his skills. Those are my top 5 Halloween looking champions in the game, but I'm curious to hear from you. So let me know, do you agree with me? Do you like the ones on my list? Or what are some other ones that you find are really awesome looking champions and have some really cool skills? As I said, some of the ones on this list are definitely useful, and I kind of stand behind the thing that any champion will have a niche use and somewhere that we can actually use them in the game. But in honor of Halloween, I definitely had to include these ones in my top 5 list. Don't forget that you can also get an awesome looking champion of your own. If you're starting a new account or you're a new player to raid, all you have to do is download the game using my link down below or scanning the QR code on the screen so you can get Elenaril, who is very cool looking, but also has some useful skills, especially if you're starting early on. She will help you through that campaign and those dungeons. Be sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. I will see you guys next time. Bye! Next level.